Oh, Mark, it's a pleasure to be with you, and especially to have a discussion over this very critical issue. My name is James Rosebush, and I'm on tonight from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
So, James, I'm guessing you spent quite a bit of time in Santa Barbara back in the day when you were working for the White House. And I'm curious, you have advised leaders, at the literally at the highest level. What was the most unexpected quality that made someone a great leader in your experience?
Mark, that really relates to what you were mentioning about the Reagans having a ranch right near where you're speaking from tonight. But one day, we had Queen Elizabeth um, come as she came for a state visit in
That was
California.
a big deal here.
I was with her every day that she was there. I was with her, and there's more to that story I can tell you about. And it reminds me she was a great leader in her own right, and we could have hour long conversation just about her. But anyway, the Reagans had invited her to come up to the ranch. Well, now Nancy Reagan, not Ronald Reagan, but Nancy Reagan was absolutely in complete turmoil about having someone as important as the Queen of England come to this little ranch house that was literally it was as far from elegant as you could imagine. So it was tough for her, but this is what happened. So we get up, and it was a rainy day. It rained the whole week that the Queen was in
Yeah, it
California.
did. We had
So
floods that week.
terrible. So we got up to the ranch, and guess what? The Reagans found out that the Queen and Prince Philip had their own ranch house they allowed no servants. And as he would, let's see, she said about him, or he said he did the washing up, is what it's called. So she cooked, and he did the washing up, no servants, and it was a very humble cottage, and they liked to get away from the houses that were staffed, fully staffed, all that sort of thing. And it really brought the whole conversation and tenor of this state visit up there into a completely different category of really new kind of closeness. I think when you find people that uh, take away that concern about your level of
Mhm.
achievement and your importance. This has a lot to do with our conversation of leadership. Is it importance that makes you a leader? Is it stature? Is it position? These are all really interesting topics to consider because labels don't necessarily make a leader. But anyway, that's enough about Santa Barbara. But I can't be as close to Santa Barbara as I am digitally right now with you and not recall those stories. I love being there.
I'm thinking that there has been literally changing of the guard, but how what leadership means feels different 40 years ago, 40 almost 45 years ago now than it does today. What would you say are the major changes that have you concerned? Because I know you're concerned about leadership.
Well, I'm very concerned. I'm very, very concerned. There are four things that have happened in global culture that have affected this change. And the first one is the ubiquitous and unconstrained availability of information. So
Mm, mm,
realize that
mm.
today you don't have to be dependent on anyone.
Right,
You can
right.
find out anything about anyone, where they live.
Anytime.
You can, and I'm very bad at this. I have to say, Mark, if someone tells me where they live and what their address is, I'm looking at, oh, that's a nice house, all that sort of thing. So that's just a crude example. But today, you don't need a leader to tell you anything, to answer any of your questions. You can find all the information on various digital platforms
Okay.
so this is available to the public.
So
There is
that's one, the information
that is
glut.
one. Number two is the change of leadership, where a leader is supposed to give advice, inspiration, and to be an example. So today you have what I call the democratization of leadership. So everyone is a leader. Everyone's supposed to be a leader. And this is, you'll see, for example, in elementary school classrooms, I mean, kids are put in positions of, okay, you're a leader. Well, that's good to teach leadership concepts, but at the same time, and I have a little story that I told. I have when two of my grandsons were in basically kindergarten. Grandparents and parents were invited to come in and read a book. I'm sure a lot of your listeners have experienced this. So you're reading to these kids, and I was trying to be interesting, and I was reading this book, and all the kids were just, they weren't paying attention to me at all. And I was devastated because I wanted to make my grandsons happy. So in a few minutes after that, one of my grandsons stood up and he went like this with his arm. Wait a minute. Everyone has to be quiet. My grandfather is reading this story. Well, they did. They quieted down. And then at the end of this session, I watched they were called Cobros because they were born the same week to different mothers. So my other grandson got up and led everyone out of the classroom. He was the leader. And I thought, wow, what an interesting example of leadership. One grandson stands up and makes a proclamation. The other one leads the group out. I thought very interesting qualities of leadership. The third is that we have an institutional crisis of trust in our organization. So today, the US Congress, the media, all of our institutions, Mark, are at the absolute most critical low point in history. No one, and these organizations don't seem to care about it. The U.S. Congress has an extremely low standing in terms of public confidence. The media certainly is at its lowest in terms of public confidence. Well, we can laugh at that, or we can debate it, or we can think it's perhaps not meaningful. Well, that's not understanding that it used to be that our confidence in public institutions was high. And that is where a lot of our leadership rested. This is not good. So this is the third point. And the fourth, of course, everyone talks about this, is the turmoil and degradation of or disappearance of values and principles that keep, as I say, keep the generals fighting in a way that you can trust someone because you know that they have values. And these values, of course, come and are given to us by our parents or our schools or our churches or other entities. And they've really dropped the ball on this, or people just aren't paying attention. So those, I think, are probably the grounding issues of this question: where have our leaders gone? And the question really is, through those 4 points, do we have an opportunity to regain this?
So I'm curious if we can, starting with the first one, the information glut, and we have our heads, literally all of us have our heads stuck in our screens most of the time. And there's so many examples. I feel like I'm the old crazy guy when I walk into a restaurant and there's people on a date and they're both looking at their screens, and I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? I'm curious because the iPhone's now 15, 16 years old now. So it's almost generational, right? So it's almost a generation. Do you feel like these 4 points have been exacerbated in the last 20 years, or did it start before that? Or was it in fact in place when you were in the White House 45 years ago?
No, I think that this has been an accelerated decline. There's no question that people have been less interested in institutional values for quite some time. But if you think back to the values that, in order to fight a world war, in order to really stand up for what you believe and stand up for those countries that, if that's why it was called the Greatest Generation, of course, those who fought in World War II and the sacrifices that they made. Well, think about that. They were making a sacrifice based on values,
Yeah.
and that was protecting liberty and freedom. And that is why America was placed here originally. And it's fascinating. One of the things that goes along with this is one of my very favorite Winston Churchill quotes. And I think this is absolutely paramount to understanding what leadership really is when he said, the further you can look back, the farther you can see in the future. Now, I ask you, Mark, is there much history being taught today? Do people even understand? Does it have, and by the way, there were a great deal of mistakes made by so-called leaders at the end of World War One in Versailles, and as well as at the end of World War Two. And I don't think we would be in the situation that we're in today, either in the West or in the East, if better decisions had been made. Now, here's Churchill saying, and of course he was the author of I think it was at least 62 books.
Right.
So he did a tremendous amount of research, and he happened to have been involved in a number of incursions, and not always to ending the way he wanted them to be. But he had this great insight that you had to know the past. Well, Mark, that's another thing going on. People aren't interested in the past. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
They're not, first of all, they're not taught anything about the past. I was at a dinner the other night that was honoring Winston Churchill's Lord Soames, who was his grandson, and just, he served 36 years in the Parliament, just a wonderful, wonderful person. Well, he happened to bring his nephew with him along to this dinner. There were about 20 people, and we were having a marvelous conversation. And his nephew stood up at one point. This is all very friendly conversation. And he said, what is all this talk about America being a special place? America is just another country. Well, you know what Ronald Reagan said in 1954, even before he even thought.
Years before, yeah.
Years before he thought of being a politician. He said that to him, America was more of an idea than a place.
Yeah. Exactly.
Think about that. Now, so I just I couldn't resist. I stood up and I made a couple of comments, and I said, well, I have to disagree with you. America was put here for a purpose. And that purpose is to bring freedom and liberty to the entire world. And that is what makes America different. And you see, the rest of the world is in complete chaos. The president I work for also said that if America grows weak, the rest of the world goes into chaos. And you see that is exactly what has happened today. That the world has gone, and this is another leadership rule. Now, what I saw in the difference, for example, because I had a great vantage point to see this, and that is Thatcher. So a lot was made, and we're talking about leadership here now, right? There was a lot made about the relationship between Reagan and Thatcher. Well, that it was a very convenient and useful relationship, no question, to have this strong alliance. And it also included, by the way, the wonderful Pope. So who I was blessed by 3 times. So, this is a person that obviously, as in his leadership role, was very, very important, not just in being the head of the church, but what he was able to do politically. So you see Thatcher, let's just put Thatcher and Reagan as 2 leaders right in parallel. And what happened to Thatcher? So in the early days, I remember being at a luncheon at number 10 Downing Street, and we were at the top of the stairs. There's a dining room there, and at one point she had to get up, and this is the Reagans were there and so forth, but she left, and for some reason I had to leave at the same time, so we walked down the front stairs together, and she turned to me and she said, "Oh, Jim, do you think I'll be able to find a car to take me over to the Parliament so I can do the questions session?" And I thought, oh, this is a different kind of leadership than in the U.S. That in the U.S. the limousine moves, the president moves like this, and he moves like this, and they meet in complete everything is so planned and executed. And so I thought, what? How interesting. She wouldn't care about getting in a taxi, a black taxi, and going over there. I was impressed by that. So I watched her through the years. This is what happened after, especially after what happened, in the Falklands. She gained a sense of her importance that went beyond what I saw walking
Mm.
down the stairs, the front stairs of number 10 Downing Street. She began to think and believe that she was grand. And you see at the end, this caused her to leave her position in a very negative state. And I had invited her to receive the first global, let's say, leadership award that was awarded one night at Thomas Jefferson's house and Monticello. I'm sure you've
Mm.
been there.
Sure.
Many of
Yep.
your listeners have as well. It's only lit at night by candlelight. There's no electricity in the house. So she gave a speech. Well, guess what? When you're put in a position like that, you speak about the person who's honoring you. But she spoke about herself,
Mm.
and she compared herself to Thomas Jefferson. And I was seated next to her assistant who accompanied her here, and she was mortified. I was mortified. And I thought, well, this is where this grand, important, very important leader has ended up thinking too highly of herself.
James, I appreciate these reflections on leadership that will get our audience to think quite a bit about it. Thank you so much for joining us with TEDx Santa Barbara.